Well, the Commonwealth Games seems to be still going because the amount of gymnastics that's been done in the last 48 hours by all and sundry, from Geelong to the AFL to the AFL Players Association, has been elite. And a short time ago, Geelong Chief Executive Steve Hocking fronted the media, and where he was asked who signed off on the waiver for Jake Kolodjashnij.
Yes, absolutely, and I take responsibility for the fact that we didn't lodge it with the AFL and the PA.
Is there a reason why it wasn't lodged with the AFL?
No, there's no reason. It was just a misstep in the process, Ben. Yeah.
So how's your position at the moment?
Well, I'm quite confident. I've got a board that's very supportive, and as I said, I'll take full responsibility for it. I'm CEO of the Geelong Football Club, and we'll work through it over the coming week.
Look, I've just got a couple of statements in front of me because we're going to paint the fullness of picture and bring you up to speed because a lot has happened, as I mentioned, in the last 48 hours. Let's start with Jake Kolodjashnij. Of course, he was identified as the player in question. He says, while I appreciate the efforts made not to identify me, the speculation has left me feeling I needed to address this personally. I participated fully in the AFL independent concussion panel process, respect its independence, and was comfortable with the outcome. I've continued playing AFL football since. What disappoints me the most is my private medical information has been made public. Everyone deserves the right to keep their confidential medical information private. He goes on to thank everyone involved in the last 24 hours, and he feels healthy and feels good, and he's focusing on his football. Now, just before I bring you two in, Geelong Cats CEO Steve Hocking issued a statement before he fronted the media, and the two paragraphs that jump out to me, which I really want to discuss. The club was not attempting to vary the terms of the AFL standard playing contract or attempting to avoid its responsibilities under health and safety laws. The club's focus throughout the process was providing care and support to the player with the intention to give the player agency in the decision-making process around their own playing career. Laura, it seems like this document that was signed by all and sundry was doing the exact thing that they're trying to claim that they weren't doing, and Steve Hocking just then said it was just a misstep in process.
This is a mess, Jim. A misstep to not inform the AFL of a particular document that is not a standard playing document or contract for players.
Do we believe that the AFL wasn't aware? Because this is a matter...
What I'm worried about is that this is opening
club.
The floodgates. So we've heard about one case with Jake Kolodjashnij who's been forced to come out and identify himself because Steve Hocking wasn't going to do it in the press conference. That's fine. That's his decision. But the speculation around it means that Jake Kolodjashnij, because he was a name that was being spoken about a lot, there were a couple, has felt that he's got no choice but to come out and defend his position in all of this. And I feel sorry for him, but I also don't understand how this can happen. The AFL should have known, or if someone there did know, they need to find out, because there's no way that this should go on under the current agreements that we have for player welfare and concussion and not involve the AFL. And I think there is a world in which this becomes more common given the problems with insurers and what we're seeing. But, yeah, it's a mess.
Yeah, you can't just say, yep, I accept responsibility and it was a misstep. He's a CEO of a football club who's also been a GM of a football club, but also the GM of football for the AFL. He's well too experienced. He should know. And the other thing that's sort of coming out of it's raising more questions. And for me, Lloydie, the AFL and the AFL Players Association have never been accused of being efficient. Like they take a long time to get things. You look at the time it takes to get to the bottom of anything. But we had a joint statement from both of them within 24 hours.
Because they know, don't they, Lloydie?
Well, that's what it points to.
Yeah.
Well, did they hope it was just everyone was going to let this go and say, oh, okay, they've ticked off on it and everyone's going to move on, and it's been the opposite. Like I don't want Andrew Dillon. Andrew Dillon's going to speak tomorrow, but I would love for Andrew Dillon, Craig Drummond, and also Stephen Hocking to sit out the front all together and just sit there and answer questions. I don't know if they keep their jobs, to be honest, the Stephen Hocking and Craig Drummond. That's how serious this is. So I think that in one sense they were saying we were trying to protect this player to give him a career. But at the same time, if he gets another head knock, well, you're on your own in a sense there, because we don't have to fund you in that situation. So I just feel for Jake. Jake agreed to it, but is his career over now as a result of this? Will he ever play again? Probably not. Yeah,
and that's what I keep coming back to, that just because you put it in the statement, the club was not attempting to vary the terms of AFL standard playing contract.
But you are.
You're trying to
creating a separate document.
Yeah, you're trying to circumnavigate that and attempting to avoid its responsibilities under health and safety laws. That's exactly what that was doing. It was discharging
absolving them of any responsibility. Yeah,
And I think there's an element to this too. You always test the temperature regarding what is put out on social media and news, and as we're prepping, as we do for any broadcast, what's the general feel in the public? There's a genuine sense it's same old Geelong, as in like that they'll be able to just ride it out and things like that. And the issue too is Craig Drummond is the chairman of the AFL, was the current chairperson where the board signed off on this. So would he be sending the email to himself to then respond to himself? And what is the AFL? These are all questions. What is the AFL Commission going to do to investigate this properly? Should they be asking Craig Drummond, you need to step aside?
Given he's in the building, yeah.
And you can't send it to your own integrity department. So like where?
As you said, who knew? And did the AFL know, Jim? So that's why it might be easy for all to come together and say nothing to see here, because too many other people knew about this as well. I just think, would it have worked for Tim English? Would it work for Tom McCartan? Would it work for someone at every club? But you're not really protecting the players in this situation. I'd love to know, are there any other players who have signed a waiver as well?
Which leads to another question that gets raised off the back of it, because last night, working the game, good win by the Kangaroos too, which we'll touch on, versus the Western Bulldogs. Is the game heading to a point where waivers are part of your terms and conditions playing? And we always have a caller who has some sort of legal background goes, well, you can't do that. You can't waive your rights. But it seems like the AFL and the game at the moment is in this sort of, they're spinning their wheels. Like, how do we advance it forward? Because they've got a class action going on. They want to protect players, but then how do we not change the game too much? Because people like the physicality of the game. We've gotten better with treating players, protecting players. It just feels like we're stuck in neutral at the moment, and we're trying to find a way forward.
Do you think as players, because I look from where I sit, I don't think that it's necessarily a bad idea. And I think given the problems we're seeing with the insurance companies and concussions, that maybe it will become more common. But for you two as players, is that something you would have signed?
I think that players would sign it to keep their careers, but I think they should be going the other way, where we'd say, you know what, we are so concerned about you that you get one more head knock, that we just can't give you a contract, and we don't want to give you a waiver, because where are you going to sit when you get one more head knock and your career's over? Because it's really difficult, even when you have a long career and you get to your career's over at 30, if you're lucky. Most it's over in the mid-20s. Average AFL career is 3.5 years. I just think it's irresponsible to give waivers to people. And it's more so have the hard conversation. Say, you know what, we can't give you a contract because we're so fearful of you getting another head knock. Sorry, it's over. I think you've got to be strong and have that decision with a player rather than saying, we'll just sign a waiver. But if you give another head knock, sorry.
Because I'd imagine players, you want to play as long as you can. You do, so you're probably more inclined to go, okay, that's fine, I'll sign the waiver.
You will. You would do anything, yes. But it's irresponsible, I think.
Yeah. Look, if it ever gets to a situation of before you sign your standard playing contract, nearly every club has legal representation in-house now. They've got it on their beautiful big business cards. Would it ever get to, you sit down, there's your player manager, there's whoever else you'd have as your representation, there's some representative from the club. And it's like, do you understand the terms and conditions of why you're playing? And before you actually understand all that, then we'll sign your standard playing contract because we're all comfortable. But I think that holds both accountable. So the club, you're going to do everything in your power to look after me, protect me, look after my future health. And I'm also going to do everything I can to look after myself. And so then we don't have any issues going forward. James Gallagher, AFL Players Association Chief Executive, joins us. Good evening, James.
Evening, Jimmy. Thanks for having me on.
No, really appreciate you taking the time. We'll get straight into it. First and foremost, when were you made of this waiver that was handed to Jake Kolodjashnij and in association with the Geelong Football Club?
I got a text message as I was walking into the North Sydney Oval on Saturday afternoon to watch Australia and Ireland, and was completely flummoxed and really concerned about it. Quite angry, to be honest. So yeah, that was the first we became aware of it. And at that point, didn't know the club or the player, but just had an understanding that there was something out there that looked like this for a current player.
So then the next point, James, is the response has been quite rapid, and that's typically not the way we do things in the football world. It tends to be glacial at best. But the response was rapid, and I guess the question being is, your response was hand in hand with the AFL. Why did you partner with the AFL when this was very much a player issue?
Yeah, we were really clear. We actually had something to say before that joint statement with the AFL on Thursday morning. And in that, there was a couple of things. We wanted to make clear that you can't contract out of the collective bargaining agreement, and that, any sort of arrangements like this, we need to put a stop to them and make sure that would never happen again. By late yesterday, we'd agreed with the AFL that if anyone or any club or player wanted to enter into anything to vary, terms outside of the standard conditions, that would have to come to both the AFL and the AFLPA for approval, which is a really important step and change. And also that we made quite clear that we had a joint position that we wouldn't approve anything that placed the risks solely onto a player. So essentially, arrangements like this can't happen again. We felt that was a really important statement to make jointly to the industry, to all 18 clubs and all players. That they were our key focuses to protect all of our playing group, and they were achieved really quickly. And so, and credit to the AFL that, we landed to that position. There's obviously a whole host of other things related to, the AFL and Geelong and the AFL's rules, and they're largely matters more so for the AFL and Geelong.
So James, I'm just clarifying. You said that you can't contract your way out of the CBA, but has Geelong exerted a form of executive influence here? Because the pressure that'd be put on Jake Kolodjashnij, that if he didn't sign it, he wouldn't be able to play for the Geelong Footy Club?
I think this document, it looks and feels like it's trying to change his rights. Now, how effective that is a question, but that's something we don't want to be in place, and and making sure now moving forward that any, attempt to vary the arrangements would have to come to both the AFL and the AFLPA, ensures that there is some oversight to make sure that, if there is any chance of there being pressure, that's not in place.
James, Laura Spurway here. How confident are you that there are no other arrangements like this in place? I mean, it's only been 48 hours. Can you rule out that there's no other club that has done this with a player?
Well, look, what I know is when it first came to us, it was unclear who the club and who the player was. I know that the AFL took some steps to try and, get to the bottom of that in the following days with all clubs. This is what's come up and what's been made clear and aware. So, how confident could I be that there's nothing like this at AFL level? Well, I didn't know this was in place 5 days ago, so it's hard to be completely confident. However, what I do know is it's become made quite clear that these types of arrangements won't be approved. They need to be approved. So I have a lot more confidence today than I did yesterday that none of our members are potentially going to be subject to waivers of this kind at AFL level.
So speaking of confidence, what gives you that level of confidence so quickly then?
Well, because we've reached that agreed position with the AFL that any variation outside of the standard agreements has to come through both of us for approval. And we've also reached agreement, and an understanding that we wouldn't approve any such variation that sought to pass the risk solely onto the player. So I think it's quite a clear statement that this won't happen again. And I think by extension, to the extent they're out there, we don't think they'd be valid. And in any event, there's a clear requirement now to provide them to both of us for approval.
What have you had to say to Stephen Hocking about doing this? How strong have you been with him about actually? Have you asked him the question, why did you keep it secret?
Yeah, I mean, we've had a lot of conversations with the Geelong Footy Club. Clearly disappointed that we weren't involved in the process, and more importantly that the document was in place. I do understand some complexities attached to it, that doesn't mean that the document should have been the solution. But what we have been clear on is that, in our view, it was contrary to the requirements under the AFL rules, and the club is aware of our view on that, and as is the AFL.
So James, if that's the case, should someone lose their job over this? Because I'm looking at the moment and seeing that there's not a sanction for Geelong, and we've been discussing about whether, Steve Hocking or Craig Drummond or someone who was a part of this process should actually be accountable, because Jake Kolodjashnij now has private medical information in the public. I mean, that's not something that a player should have to go through. So does someone take responsibility, accountability for that is more than just releasing a media statement?
Well, I think now there's a please explain's been provided to the club late today, I'm aware of. As I said, our view is that this document was likely in breach of the AFL's rules, and ultimately the decision on what sanction flows from that is that would be a matter for the AFL. It's their rules to govern. So, I'll leave that ultimately to them to make that decision.
So James, can you understand, I guess, the vigour or the heat in this one? Because the great outward that we've got now in sports and media is, as soon as we mention complexity, that's a conversation stopper. And we hear Steve Hocking just say, wow, well, it's a misstep. And that actually seems to be not quite at the level when we're talking about the most serious issue in our game, past and present and currently, regarding concussion. So can you understand the people, or to use your word, a little bit flummoxed by the response compared to the action?
Oh, absolutely, Jimmy. I mean, if we go back to the start of the conversation, I was really disappointed and angry at first, and and concerned, and that's why for us it was about really quickly moving to what's the action to protect the individual player, but also protect the collective playing group moving forward, and we've been able to achieve that quickly. But can absolutely understand it's a significant issue. I mean, concussion is a significant issue for our game, but most importantly, protecting our people is critical. And I think there's clearly a bigger conversation that we need to have to make sure that we're really confident our players have got strong protections. It doesn't mean they can't be improved, particularly beyond their careers. But we also need to make sure that we don't have situations like this where people are trying to pass on responsibility because they feel exposed. So, I can absolutely appreciate that concern, and we share it. Would
you like the AFL to ask Craig Drummond to step aside and do a proper investigation into this, considering he was also chair of the Geelong board that ticked off on this and now is chair of the AFL?
The AFL, as I understand it, are investigating. In terms of what the outcomes of that are, that is a matter for them, and their governance in particular is a matter for them. What our priority always will be is that our players are supported, looked after and protected, and that's absolutely been our primary focus. And now the next step will be, what is the consequence of this for Geelong, and that's a process the AFL's in the midst of.
Last one, what's Jake's state of mind right now?
I don't like necessarily talking about my conversations with players, but what I will say is that I've had quite a few conversations with Jake. Obviously, like any player, when they're in the middle of a media storm, that's not a comfortable position to be in. I know he feels healthy. He feels confident in his ability to play footy. But clearly there's an impact when you're right in the middle of it.
And part B to that, have you had conversations with his management group, the people there to represent him in these situations?
Yeah, I've been speaking to his management. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And they were comfortable with how this process played out?
As far as I'm aware, they weren't aware of it.
The managers were aware. His manager didn't know about this?
As far as I'm aware, yeah.
So, James, that paints the immediate picture that Jake was there and the club presented it to him, and then that's how we've got to where we are.
Yeah, my understanding is that, he had supports around him, but I don't think it was his accredited player agents.
Do you know whether his family was aware of it? his family involved in the conversation?
Well, that's certainly, I think Geelong have outlined that was the case. But yeah, I'm aware he had support around him. I'm just saying, and it's important for us, the role of his accredited agents within it, because we regulate the accredited agents, but I understand they weren't involved.
James, we really appreciate you being honest up front and jumping on the line for us. Thank you for your time.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate you having me on.
James Gallagher, AFL Players Association Chief Executive.
Next call, I think, is getting his management group on, I think.
That shocked me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't understand how that's possible. That's a massive decision. That's a contract decision. It's a health decision.
That's why you pay your managers.
Yeah, I don't understand why that person wouldn't have been involved, even in the loop as an advocate.